There are currently 4 different iPad models. You've got the Mini, the standard iPad, the Air, and the Pro. But if you factor in the 2 different sizes available with Air and Pro, then you're up to 6 models. And if you think that's enough choice, don't forget the different storage configurations. There's 2 on the Mini, 2 on the standard iPad, 4 on the Air, and 4 on the Pro. So now we've got 20 different choices. But there's more. Don't forget that each iPad can be ordered as Wi-Fi only or Wi-Fi plus cellular. And that takes us up to 40 combinations of model, size, and storage. And we're not done there, because you can also choose nano texture glass on the Pro models, provided you choose 1 terabyte or more of storage. So that brings us to, I think, 48 different iPad choices. And that's before we even get to colours. There are 4 colours for the Mini, 4 for the standard iPad, 4 for the Air, and 2 for the Pro, because professionals aren't interested in colour, apparently. Anyway, if I've added this up right, I make that 144 different combinations of iPad model, colour, storage, size, and other options. And we've not even mentioned the array of pencils and keyboards available. Well, that's quite a confusing choice to make. I mean, in fairness, the average non-techie iPad customer is most likely going to base their decision mostly on price and then size and colour preference. And they'll probably be happy with their choice, but tech geeks like me probably end up overthinking and suffering some sort of paralysis in the decision-making process. But I have bought a new iPad, and I am really happy with it. In fact, I'd go so far as to say that it is the perfect iPad for me. But to get here, I first made the wrong decision and bought a different model, which I ended up returning. So I want to tell you about my experience in finding the perfect iPad. And this isn't intended to be a definitive buying guide, because after all, remember, this is my perfect iPad. It might not be your perfect iPad. But hopefully I can share some of my thought process, and that might be helpful to your purchasing decision, or at least entertaining or interesting in some way. Now, we need a little bit of context here. I'm a creative professional and business owner, so I occasionally might push an iPad with a Pro app or a game, but typically I'll use a laptop or workstation for any more complex computing tasks. But I am also a bit of a geek, and I like to play with tech, so I will lean towards the more powerful models, even if I don't necessarily need that performance. And I think it's also important to say that I've had or used most of the different iPad models since they originally launched, but I'm by no means an Apple fanboy. I've also had a number of Samsung tablets from the original Note onwards, and a couple of other Android tablets, and several Surface Pros. The last iPad I had was a 12.9-inch M1 model, which I sold about a year ago. And before buying this new iPad, I was using a Surface Pro 9 and this Samsung Galaxy Tab Ultra 9. Bit of a mouthful. When rumours first surfaced last year of the smaller Pro model getting an OLED screen, I'd been planning to get one of those. And when the launch happened, I was still thinking the 11-inch Pro was the one for me. Now, of course, I knew that Apple putting the crazy powerful M4 chip in the iPad would be a fairly pointless exercise, because the majority of iPad users, probably including me, would never be able to make the most of it. But with an iPad, it's not just about processing power. This is a tablet. You hold it in your hand, you touch the display. It's more intimate and personal than a laptop, so the aesthetics really matter. The way it looks, the way it feels in your hand, and the way that the display responds to your touch. These things are important, and they're probably more important than raw computing power and benchmark numbers. The Pro model may be overkill for my needs, but it's so beautifully slim, it feels special and premium in the hand. And this OLED display is stunning. It's the best display on any tablet or computer I've ever used. And since the iPad is a tablet, it is all about that display. For me, and bear in mind this is just my opinion, this is worth paying extra for. The iPad Air is cheaper than the Pro, and it now has the M2 chip, which is still much more power than the majority of iPad users will ever be able to utilise. But it's a little thicker, a little heavier, and it doesn't have this OLED display. It has a very good display. In fact, all of the iPads are great in that regard, but it is just a standard 60Hz LCD panel. The 120Hz versus 60Hz argument is a hotly contested one. There are some tech fans on social media who seem to be obsessed with it, and they like to throw shade at the iPhone and iPad models that only have the 60Hz panels. Now, personally, I'm not bothered with that on a phone, but for a tablet, I have to say interacting with a 120Hz display does feel better. It doesn't make any difference to the performance of the device, but as I say, the way that the tablet feels to use, that's really important. It's actually the reason why I ended up buying this Galaxy Tab Ultra. Just using it in the store sold it to me. It's got this beautiful 120Hz OLED display, which the iPad Pro now matches and goes even further, in fact, with its astonishing brightness levels. So I thought I was clear in my mind on what I would buy, and that would be an 11-inch Pro. And I was going to use it to replace my Surface Pro. Now that's not a like-for-like swap, but I found I wasn't using the Surface Pro that much because I got a gaming laptop that I can use if I need a portable device to work on Windows. And whilst the Surface Pro is a great all-rounder, it's not really a great tablet. And the screen was really quite average compared to any iPad or Samsung tablet. So I sold it. And then I took myself down to the Apple Store to have a look at the 11-inch iPad Pro. And of course, in the store, they had the 11-inch side by side with the 13-inch, both being displayed on the Magic Keyboard. So I typed on the small one and I typed on the big one, and I looked at the small screen and then I looked at the big screen, and you can probably see where this is going. I started thinking bigger is better. And I found myself getting seduced by the thought of all that M4 computing power. Started thinking that to make the most of it, I'd need the bigger model. And whilst I'm at it, if I'm buying performance, then I'd better choose the 1TB model, so I get the 16 gigs of RAM and the extra performance core in the processor, right? To justify the purchase, I figured that what I could do is also sell my Galaxy Tab Ultra 9. After all, I wouldn't need two large tablets, so I could buy this one larger iPad and replace my Surface Pro and my Tab Ultra 9. And who knows what goodies Apple would bring to iPadOS at WWDC. If this all sounds a little familiar, it's because I've been here before with the M1 iPad Pro. I ended up buying the 1TB model then, in eager anticipation of new releases at WWDC, only to watch an announcement about widgets being added to iPadOS. It was an epic disappointment, so would I make the same mistake again? I'm ashamed to say that I did, and I don't even know why. I mean, I suppose at least now we do have some Pro apps available in DaVinci Resolve, Final Cut Pro and Logic Pro on the iPad, so I could use those apps to make the most of the performance. This could work. And whilst I'm spending all this money, well, I better buy the Magic Keyboard to go with it. And of course the new Pencil Pro, because my old one won't work with it. And I got home, I unboxed it all, I switched it on, I set it up, and the disappointment came in waves because the experience feels exactly the same as the M1 iPad Pro. Nothing seemed to have changed. Yes, we've got beautiful new hardware with astonishing capabilities, but the same old compromised software experience. And those Pro apps, Final Cut and Logic, couldn't save the situation because Apple has come over all Adobe and wants to charge me a monthly subscription fee. Just no. And then as reality sets in that I've got to sell my Galaxy Tab Ultra, I found I just couldn't do it. Firstly, as a device for watching movies and content, the Tab Ultra is just awesome because of the aspect ratio of the screen. It's better suited to video content. The iPad with its squarer display ratio always ends up with black bars top and bottom. So whilst it is a large screen, the displayed content is much smaller than on the 14-inch Tab Ultra. And secondly, I use my Tab Ultra for some teaching work that I do, and I like to mark up a PDF with my notes, and I can do this right in Samsung Notes. And it's really easy to write with the S Pen and then just click the button on the S Pen to cycle through different highlighter colours. And I personally actually prefer the feel of the S Pen for writing, although I will say that Apple's Pencil has the edge for drawing. On the tab, I can position the Notes app with my marked up PDF next to a web browser or another reference application, and I can divide the screen exactly how I like, which is about 2/3 of the screen for the PDF and the remaining third for the other app. And then I can tweak it in small amounts as needed. But trying to replicate this simple workflow on the iPad Pro was nothing short of frustrating. Yes, you can import a PDF into Apple Notes, or you can use OneNote or any number of free PDF apps, but none of them works as easily as the Galaxy Tab and Samsung Notes. Some apps on the iPad have their own pencil palette, and those don't tend to be that great in my experience. Most use Apple's standard pencil palette, but that doesn't allow you to put favourite colours on the main palette. They're always an extra tap away. And if you rotate the new Pencil Pro, it changes the thickness of your highlighting. Now, some people might love that feature, but I don't. It requires me to be more precise. Now, maybe there is an app out there that would work well for me, but that means buying something. And these days, it seems you can't just buy an app on the App Store. No, you've either got to sign up to some eye-watering subscription, or at best, it's going to be an in-app purchase to unlock functionality, which is something that developers do to get around Apple's family sharing. And even then, I found myself contending with the iPadOS file management. You download the PDF and it's in the Downloads folder. You can copy it with the Files app to put it somewhere else, but then invariably, when you open or edit it with an app, that app will make a separate copy of the file and store it within its own folder, rather than just modify the original file. And I find that frustrating. And then there's the multitasking. You still can't choose your own screen split. It's either half and half or 1/4, 3/4, neither of which worked for my specific use case. And I tried using Stage Manager, but I found that more awkward than the simple method I use on the Tab. In the end, I just couldn't bring myself to sell the Galaxy Tab Ultra, and I was feeling nothing but negativity towards my new iPad. Now, of course, this is just one small use case, and it's by no means my only reason for wanting an iPad, so I still wanted an iPad. So I decided to take my 13-inch model back to the Apple Store and swap it for an 11-inch version. And I do love that Apple let you do this without any kind of complaints. It's no problem at all to swap things over. Before I did it though, I tried the 11-inch Magic Keyboard again, in isolation this time, and I found that actually I can type accurately on it. Apple has shrunk the keys that you don't use that often on the edge of the keyboard in order to make the main keys normal size, and that actually works really well. So that decided it for me. I was going to go for the 11-inch iPad Pro and get the smaller Magic Keyboard, and I decided to go for a 512 gig model. So I'm losing 8 gigabytes of RAM and a processor core compared to the model that I returned. But actually, I'm happy with that. I don't need a terabyte of storage on my iPad. I was only buying it to have that more powerful CPU and the larger amount of RAM. And the fact that I know from my own testing that this will make negligible real-world difference, well, it just made me feel a bit daft for buying that bigger model in the first place. In fairness, 256 gigs would probably have been plenty, but I figured the 512 model would have slightly faster storage and give me a bit more future-proofing. So I got my new model home and I went through the unboxing and setting up process again, and naturally I benchmarked it. And as you can see, there's basically no difference in graphics performance between the 11-inch and 13-inch model. And that extra performance core isn't doing that much either. You wouldn't see massive differences between the binned M4 and the more expensive version on macOS, let alone iPadOS. So you're not missing out if you buy a 256 or 512 model of the iPad Pro, and the same is true of the iPad Air. The vast majority of people will never benefit from the additional RAM and performance because iPadOS is the limiting factor. There is just one place where I notice the difference in RAM, and that's with apps suspending in the background. When you switch between apps, if you've got more RAM, they stay in memory and they load up instantly. We often buy hardware based on performance numbers, and it's really easy to forget that hardware is only half the equation. You need to have the software that allows you to take advantage of the hardware. And whilst there are pro apps that are starting to unlock that on iPad, you still have these basic frustration around things like file handling that are blockers to workflows. I think part of my problem is that I'd lost sight of what the iPad is. When Steve Jobs launched the original iPad, he pitched it as a device that sits between your phone and your computer. It was always meant to be a companion or a complement to these devices. Now, true, since then, phones have gotten much more capable and larger, but the iPad still makes the most sense in this middle role. And actually, some of the features that Apple has added have really supported this role. Things like the magical continuity mode. I just love that I can use the iPad as an extension of my MacBook, or vice versa. These features show to me that Apple does know what the iPad is, but then they've chosen to confuse that by focusing on hardware performance numbers at these launches, and then marketing the iPad as a computer replacement. And of course, there are people who can do all of their computing on an iPad. But there are also many who would find that frustrating. So for me, the companion role makes the most sense, especially on a device of this size. 11 inches is perfect. It's easy to hold, easy to transport, but big enough to get things done. And I'd lost sight of that having had 3 of the larger iPad Pro models. And with that large size, I just somehow expect more from it. But with the smaller model, I don't. I don't even care that it's got this ludicrously fast processor that I can't fully utilize, because in my mind, the money that I've paid is for that slimness, that beauty, the form factor, and the overall experience. But it actually gets better. When you add the Magic Keyboard, something else happens. I've always been a fan of small laptops, and I loved the MacBook Air 11-inch. It was a great laptop for traveling with, and I use mine a lot, not for heavyweight work, but just for getting basic tasks done on the go. Managing servers, fixing code, working in data centers, or updating business spreadsheets and answering email is a great form factor that fits on airplane tray tables and doesn't take up much space in your bag. And I can do all of those things with the help of a few apps on the iPad Pro 11-inch. So not only have I reconnected with what the iPad does best, I feel like I've also found the spiritual successor to the 11-inch MacBook Air, and arguably the 12-inch MacBook. So this is my perfect iPad, or at least as perfect as it gets in the current lineup. What's yours? Please share your thoughts in the comments, and hopefully this experience has been helpful to you in finding an iPad that fits your workflow and lifestyle. Thanks for watching and supporting the channel. We'll see you again soon for some more geekery.